Hey guys! Today we're diving into the incredible story of Yoshie Shiratori, Japan's real-life escape artist. He escaped 4 times from some of Japan's toughest prisons. Shiratori's story is legendary in Japan, a symbol of never giving up. He used his brains, guts, and determination to break free. Buckle up, because we're about to take you on a wild ride through the life of Yoshie Shiratori. Yoshie Shiratori's story isn't just about breaking out of prison, it's about fighting for justice and standing up for what you believe in. Shiratori always maintained his innocence, claiming he was wrongly convicted. His escapes were about proving his truth. This is a story about resilience, courage, and one man's unwavering belief in his own innocence. Yoshie Shiratori was born in Aomori Prefecture, Japan, in 1907. Known for its harsh winters and rugged mountains, Aomori shaped Shiratori into a tough, resourceful survivor. Growing up, he learned the value of hard work and how to navigate tough situations. These skills would come in handy later. Shiratori wasn't just physically strong, he was incredibly clever. He had a knack for problem-solving and hated injustice. This sense of fairness, combined with his intelligence, fueled his determination to escape. Before his arrest, he had no serious criminal record. Little did he know his life was about to take a dramatic turn. In 1933, Shiratori was accused of robbery and murder. He swore he was innocent, but nobody believed him. Convicted on flimsy evidence, he was sentenced to hard time in Aomori prison. Aomori prison was notorious for its brutal conditions. It was here that the legend of Yoshie Shiratori began to take shape. Aomori prison was a nightmare with brutal guards and overcrowded cells. For Shiratori, prison life was pure torture, but he refused to let the system crush his spirit. He clung to his belief in his innocence, and with that belief came a burning desire to escape. Shiratori felt the depth of the injustice he faced. He was innocent, wrongly convicted, and thrown into a brutal system. Every day fueled his determination to escape. He started to observe, plan, and plot. He knew his freedom depended on outsmarting the system. Shiratori's time in Aomori wasn't just about plotting. He had to survive. He used his ingenuity to improve his living conditions. He befriended other inmates and scavenged for food. He exercised and read to keep his mind sharp. He was preparing himself for the moment he would make his move. Inside Aomori prison, Shiratori was like a wolf pacing its cage. He spent months observing the prison's routines. He noticed the metal shackles were weak in certain spots. He started experimenting, subtly bending the metal. He knew a successful escape required careful planning. Opportunity arrived in the form of a metal bucket. Shiratori snagged a piece of wire and shaped it into a lockpick. He practiced picking the lock on his cell door at night. He noticed the bars on a small window were old and rusted. He began to chip away at the mortar, preparing for his escape. The night of his escape was bitterly cold. Shiratori picked the lock on his cell door and slipped out. He contorted his body, dislocating his shoulders to squeeze through a narrow window. He dropped to the ground, racked with pain but grinning. He was free, but now he faced the unforgiving wilderness. The world outside the prison was harsh, especially in winter. But for Shiratori, it was paradise compared to prison. He had no food, no shelter, and thin, ragged clothes. He moved through the shadows, avoiding roads and towns. For 3 years, he lived as a fugitive, driven by the desire to clear his name. Shiratori's daring escape from Aomori prison made headlines across Japan. He escaped from one of the toughest prisons and stayed free for 3 years. People were amazed by his audacity. He became a folk hero to some. To the authorities, he was a major embarrassment. They were determined to recapture him. But capturing Shiratori was no easy feat. He was like a phantom, always one step ahead. He moved from town to town, relying on his wits and charm. But his luck couldn't last forever. Seeking treatment, he was recognized and apprehended. Transferred to Akita prison, known for its harsh conditions. The authorities were taking no chances this time. They were determined to make sure his freedom was short-lived. Little did they know, they were dealing with a man whose spirit could not be broken. Akita prison was a world away from the rugged wilderness where Shiratori had spent the last 3 years. In their place were cold concrete walls, the constant clang of metal bars, and the watchful eyes of guards. He was placed in solitary confinement, locked away in a specially designed cell. But Shiratori refused to give in. He had other plans. Even in the most secure prisons, routines repeat day after day. Guards change shifts, meals are delivered, laundry is collected. Shiratori observed these routines, committing them to memory. Every evening he was served a bowl of miso soup. It was a small comfort in a bleak existence, but Shiratori saw an opportunity. He remembered a trick with salt from his childhood. Shiratori collected the leftover broth daily. He dabbed the salty broth onto the metal screws. Day after day, he repeated this act. To the guards, it seemed like madness, but Shiratori had a plan. He was exploiting corrosion to escape. Weeks turned into months, and the metal screws in Shiratori's ventilation grate began to rust and corrode. Shiratori observed the guards' routines, searching for the perfect moment. One night, a fierce storm erupted. Rain lashed the prison walls, and thunder shook the building. The wind howled and lightning flashed. It was the perfect cover. With the guards distracted, Shiratori made his move. He pried the ventilation grate free. The opening was small, but Shiratori was not deterred. He contorted his body, forcing his shoulders out of their sockets. He winced in pain but pushed himself upwards. He emerged onto the roof, the storm mirroring the turmoil in his heart. He was free, but his journey was far from over. Ahead lay a perilous descent and a desperate flight into the storm. But for now, Shiratori savored the taste of freedom. Destination, hell on earth. Okay, so Shiratori escapes from Akita, right? You'd think he'd get sent to a nice, cushy, minimum security prison after that. Maybe a place with a beach volleyball court and a decent library. Yeah, no, the authorities were not messing around this time. They shipped him off to Abashiri prison, the most notorious, brutal, and isolated lockup in all of Japan. Imagine Alcatraz, but colder, windier, and with even worse food. That was Abashiri. Located on the northern island of Hokkaido, this place was basically designed to break the human spirit. Think harsh winters, freezing temperatures, and a landscape that's as beautiful as it is unforgiving. The guards were known for their cruelty, the work was backbreaking, and the food? Let's just say you'd be better off eating snow. Shiratori had escaped from 2 high-security prisons already, so they threw him into a cell that was basically a concrete box. Their thinking was, let's see you escape from this, Houdini. They seriously underestimated this guy's will to break free. Now, the cell they put Shiratori in was supposed to be inescapable. I'm talking reinforced steel doors, Thick concrete walls, a tiny barred window way up high, the works. They even slapped on a pair of special handcuffs that he had to wear 24/7. These weren't your average Walmart handcuffs either. These things were designed to make Houdini himself say, "Nah, I'm good." They figured they finally had Shiratori right where they wanted him, broken, defeated, and ready to serve out his sentence quietly. But you see, that's the thing about Yoshie Shiratori. He was like a cockroach in a nuclear apocalypse. You just couldn't keep the guy down. No matter how small the chance, no matter how impossible the odds, he always found a way. While the guards patrolled the corridors and the other prisoners resigned themselves to their fate, Shiratori was hard at work, his mind constantly searching for a way out. He knew that every prison, no matter how secure, had its weaknesses. He just had to find them. So picture this, Shiratori stuck in this concrete cage, right? He's got nothing but time on his hands. Most guys would go crazy, but Shiratori, he starts observing, studying every nook and cranny of his cell. And then, one day, he notices something interesting about the floorboards. They're old, made of rough-hewn wood, and one of them seems a little loose. Now, most people would probably ignore a loose floorboard, not Shiratori. He saw it as a challenge, a tiny glimmer of hope in his otherwise hopeless situation. He didn't have any fancy tools, no chisels, no saws, nothing. All he had was a metal spoon he'd managed to swipe from the mess hall. Now I know what you're thinking, a spoon. Seriously. But for Shiratori, that spoon was more than just an eating utensil. It was a tool of liberation. Every day, after the guards made their rounds, Shiratori would get to work, patiently chipping away at the wood around that loose floorboard. Now, this wasn't some quick Hollywood-style escape. This was slow, painstaking work. We're talking weeks, maybe even months of chipping away at that floorboard, little by little, day after day. He had to be careful too. He couldn't let the guards hear him, couldn't let them suspect a thing. So, he'd work in the dead of night. The only sounds, the gentle scrape of metal against wood, and the pounding of his own heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Shiratori had made a hole big enough to crawl through. He slipped beneath the floorboards, disappearing into the darkness beneath the prison. He eventually emerged from a drainage pipe outside the prison walls, taking a deep breath of the crisp Hokkaido air. He was free again, surrounded by the frozen wilderness, but for Shiratori, it was a taste of paradise. But his escape was far from over. He was now a fugitive in one of the harshest environments on Earth, with nothing but the clothes on his back, his wits, and an unbreakable will to survive. By 1947, Yoshie Shiratori was practically a legend in Japan. This wasn't some Hollywood gangster, though. Shiratori was a lean, wiry guy, more likely to blend into a crowd than lead a jailbreak movie. But he'd escaped from 3 of Japan's toughest prisons, each time using his brains and guts to overcome impossible odds. The authorities were starting to think this guy was part Houdini, part mountain goat, with a dash of wizardry thrown in. After his escape from Abashiri, Shiratori was eventually recaptured. You'd think they'd just stick him in a deep, dark hole and throw away the key, right? Nope. They sent him to Sapporo prison, figuring they could contain him there. Sapporo was no cakewalk, but it wasn't the frozen hellhole Abashiri was. Maybe the authorities were getting tired, or maybe they had a sliver of respect for Shiratori's sheer tenacity. Now, Sapporo prison was still a serious place. It wasn't like Shiratori was getting room service and cable TV, but the atmosphere was different. The guards, while still watchful, treated him with a grudging curiosity. They'd heard the stories, seen how he'd outsmarted entire prisons. There was a sense that even they were kinda impressed by this unassuming guy who kept slipping through their fingers. Shiratori, ever observant, noticed this shift. He was no longer just a number, a problem to be contained. There was a weird sort of respect, a recognition that he was no ordinary criminal. He was still shackled, still confined, but for the first time in years, Shiratori sensed a glimmer of something different in the air. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew he couldn't let his guard down. He never stopped planning, never stopped looking for a way out. But this time, escape wasn't his only goal. Section 3. The Art of the Mealtime Escape. Shiratori's escapes were never about brute force. He was a master of observation, always looking for the tiniest flaw, the weakest link. In Sapporo, that link turned out to be his dinner tray. Yeah, you heard that right. The trays were made of cheap metal, and Shiratori, with his endless patience, started pocketing tiny pieces every day. He'd hide them in his clothes, under his bed, anywhere the guards wouldn't look too closely. Over time, he collected enough metal scraps to fashion a crude tool. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. He used it to slowly, methodically work on the locking mechanism of his handcuffs. Remember those special Houdini-proof cuffs they put on him? Well, they hadn't accounted for Shiratori's ingenuity and a steady supply of metal shavings from the prison cafeteria. Now, I'm not saying you should try this at home, or anywhere really, but Shiratori wasn't your average dude. He was a master of improvisation, turning everyday objects into tools of freedom. Section 4. A walk to clear his name. One day, with his handcuffs loosened just enough, Shiratori saw his chance. During the usual midday chaos of guards changing shifts and prisoners shuffling about, he slipped away. He didn't run, didn't make a fuss. He simply walked out of Sapporo prison, a ghost disappearing into the bustling city. This time, though, something was different. Shiratori wasn't just running for freedom, he was on a mission. He'd always maintained his innocence, claimed he was wrongly convicted, and now he was determined to prove it. Instead of disappearing into the wilderness, Shiratori set off on foot, for Tokyo. He planned to walk hundreds of miles, surviving on scraps and kindness, to reach the capital and plead his case to the highest authorities. This wasn't just an escape, it was a pilgrimage, a testament to one man's unwavering belief in justice and his own innocence. Section 1. The Final Stand. Can you imagine walking hundreds of miles on foot to clear your name? That's exactly what Shiratori did. He walked for weeks, maybe even months, surviving on whatever he could find. He slept in fields, begged for scraps, and dodged police patrols. This guy was like a real-life ninja, except instead of throwing stars, he had a heart full of determination and a stomach that was probably very, very empty. Finally, exhausted but unbroken, Shiratori reached Tokyo. He walked straight into a police station, probably looking like a stray cat who'd survived a hurricane. The cops were stunned, to say the least. This guy, this legend, this escape artist, just waltzed in like he was dropping by for tea. But Shiratori wasn't there to cause trouble. He calmly explained his story, his escapes, and most importantly, his innocence. He'd spent years trying to outrun the system, but now, he was facing it head-on. Section 2. The Legacy of the Unbreakable Spirit. Now you'd expect the authorities to just throw Shiratori back in prison, right? After all, the guy had escaped 4 times. But something strange happened. Remember how the guards at Sapporo had that grudging respect for him? Well, it turns out, word of Shiratori's story had spread. People were impressed by his resilience, his ingenuity, and his unwavering belief in his own innocence. The court re-examined his case, and guess what? They found out that the original conviction was based on some pretty shaky evidence. They commuted his sentence, and in 1961, Yoshie Shiratori, the man who couldn't be caged, walked out of prison a free man. He was a national hero by then, a symbol of never giving up, even when the odds are stacked against you. Shiratori lived a quiet life after that, writing about his experiences and advocating for prison reform. He died in 1979, a free man, his name cleared, his story etched in Japanese history.